So with any living organism, and anybody that's ever gardened, you know eventually something goes awry, something goes wrong. And so you got to try to determine what is causing a problem. So with bees, it is no difference. So we're going to look at some of the real common type pests. And bees don't really have a minor pest. There's some insects that will come by, maybe disturb the colony periodically, but they're not really considered a pest. But the ones we're going to talk about tonight have the potential to really disrupt the colony in all life cycles of it. So what we want to do is learn how to recognize what we call symptoms. Now, if I refer to the term sign, S-I-G-N, that means you're actually going to see the pest, what is causing the problem. And there are many organisms that have potential to cause the issues of the honeybees. And again, if you've worked with plants too, you're going to take this same approach with honeybees. We call it actually IPM, Integrated Pest Management. And the idea behind that is you're going to take, first approach would be always non-chemical. And that's the last thing I ever recommend as a county extension agent for any issue. Because a lot of times people want to know, what can I use to spray to kill this thing? I said, well, let's look at the issue. And maybe a chemical approach is not what we need right now. So that's on the bottom of my list, using chemicals. One of the main reasons, bees are very sensitive to chemicals much more than other insects too. And some of these insecticides we've used for decades, and there have been no warnings on those labels probably. One of the most common, actually, insecticide we use in our gardens, which is extremely deadly to bees. And bees are in an insect order called Hymenoptera, and they're also include our ants and wasp. So what we want to do is first look at what the potential problem could be and think, is there a cultural way? Is something I could do cultural? Maybe I don't have my hive in the right place. And so when I talk to landscapers, I use the term right plant, right place. Well, you need to position that hive so that colony is in the most suitable place. I know Gene mentioned earlier, a few years ago, when they placed the colony on the top area, they were out in direct hot sunlight all the time. And then they realized that maybe they need a little shelter to provide some shade from extreme heat. Can you imagine living on the top of a building like that? Temperature goes up drastically, particularly during the summer. So a cultural thing would be to add maybe a little lean-to type roof, provide a little shade. So that's a non-chemical. What we want to do is first determine what the problem is. And then your book really probably doesn't look at a lot of cultural practices, but always think that what can I do that will cause least harm to the colony, to the local environment, your landscape, and you. We don't think of ourselves as part of the environment, but we are. So I always push back the use of chemicals first. The reason why is they can be pretty expensive. When I tell some people the price of some products, they're going, I wish I had known that, but before I let that problem escalate until now I'm forced to use a chemical. So cultural practices, practice that first. The overuse of any type chemical. When I say the word chemical, a lot of people go, chemicals, but the water you're drinking is a chemical. Life on this planet only exists because of chemical reactions. but some chemical reactions can be harmful. So we're going to try to avoid overuse of insecticides. And we're finding a lot of resistance with insecticides now. With the common herbicide, glyphosate Roundup, it's caused major problems now, mainly just because of overuse of that product. We have glyphosate-resistant weeds that we can't even control anymore with any type of herbicide. And we also have some serious issues with insects that have built up resistant to overuse of insecticides. And so we have generally no means to try to manage. I don't like to really use the word control. If we did, we wouldn't have any problems. We manage issues. Chemicals also can get absorbed into the framing of your hive, because what is it made out of? Wood. Wood is a very absorbent product. Most people probably don't realize that when a tree stores food for itself, they think all those carbohydrates stay in the roots. They stay throughout the tree, anywhere there's wood. Wood, you could think of it as a storage organ. So chemicals will readily absorb, actually like a sponge. And so you don't want that wood to absorb any type of insecticide that could be released slowly over a period of time where bees come in immediate contact with that. So another reason I kind of back off from chemical use. Barry mentioned every once in a while, and that's once in 5 years, it's a pretty good practice actually to remove a couple of these combs out of there. What we want to do is we want to visually look at the comb. And what are we looking at? Symptoms, not signs, symptoms, its appearance. So by removing that, you can actually remove, if you have used some type of miticide, something for the mites, and we're going to go into pretty good detail on miticides, the mites that cause these problems, you're removing future potential problems with chemicals again. A lot of diseases, viral and bacterial, even fungal, can remain in wood for years and years and years and cause future problems too. So you're just going to actually just rejuvenate. Same thing I tell people about pruning blueberries. I said in 5 years, I can guarantee you'll have a brand new plant from a blueberry plant that's 15 years old. They say, well, how can you do that? I says, you're going to take 20% of that plant out every year. And in the 5th year, you're going to have a brand new plant. It has all new parts to it. So over time, you're going to have a brand new hive. It'll be a healthier colony. 2 different pesticides may, over time, cause what we call a synergistic effect, which is it becomes a more powerful insecticide or miticide with a combination of 2 different products that by themselves don't pose such a harmful threat to bees. But sometimes a combination of 2, and that's, you know what, chemical reactions again. You may have 2 products that become extremely powerful and actually cause more harm actually to the bees themselves. It may take out the pest problem, but also may cause extensive, maybe dieback of your bees too. So be very careful of pesticides. So what we're going to do when we monitor, and monitoring is the same thing I tell people on landscapes. You've got to scout and look at your plants. Know what a plant looks like when it's healthy. So know what that comb looks like when it's healthy. So let's look at actually what a healthy brood here. And you can see kind of a circular pattern like that as they're extending out the colonies, and there's drone broods in there. But you want to look at that nice light yellow tan color. It's not dark brown. That's a good indication that something's wrong. The cells that are capped. They should have a convex appearance. They should kind of bulge outward a little. If they cave in, if they're concave, that's a big issue right there. A discoloration of that, the loss of that nice yellow tan color would be a symptom. And a lot of times that may be a disease, serious disease, which is hard to correct. So what we want to do again, look at a book I really like, and this is the Beekeeper's Handbook. I don't know if you're familiar with this one too. I'll keep it out in the back or in the front when I'm through, and you can take a look at it too. It's some of the in-service training I go through as an extension agent. Dr. John Skinner, who had a big hand in writing a lot of those chapters. Unfortunately, I've heard rumors that retirement may be around the corner with him. So that depresses me. A lot of the excellent UT professors and specialists that have been around for a long time and have developed extraordinary skills are getting to the point of retirement. And I'm going, well, that's a loss. That's like your colony leaving. You lost your colony, so what are you going to do with John Skinner leaves? So I'm getting more calls to fill in, do talks, and I think they're prepping me is what they're doing. So let's look at this photo here. Everything look normal? So what's hitchhiking on the back of that bee? Varroa mite, yeah. These are very tiny mites. And now that's a great photo because you can see the contrast in color. But all bees aren't going to be that pretty and light colored either, particularly if they're dead. And if they're those little varroa mites, they can just hide in little tiny areas and hide on those bees, and you won't even see them. So they don't expose themselves readily like that to the naked eye. So that picture, it makes it very obvious. One lady just brought everything in to my office, and I put out a big sheet of poster board, and all I do was shake it real good. Some of those frames, little specks start falling out. I said, that's it right there. She said, I had no idea I had so many of these mites. Well, it took her whole colony out is what it did. See, it made them weak before the onset of winter. And they could not tolerate. When we used to get cold winters, we might this year, who knows. But when I diagnosed the problem, we had some cold winters, and they lost 2 colonies, completely 2 colonies died. They were weakened. So that's a varroa mite. Once the mite actually they can't fly, they don't have wings. They're arachnids, they're related to spiders. Once they enter a hive, they will actually find a cell that hasn't been capped, and a female will move down in that, lay eggs. And even after it's capped, they'll remain in there. And eggs will hatch into more mites, males and females, and they will mate and produce more mites that will, if that bee lives through that period, which is, it has been fed on. Now, these mites have a beak-type mouth part, and they actually puncture through the exoskeleton of the bee, and they suck out what we call the hemolymph, which is insect's blood. And it's not like our blood. Insects don't have a circulatory system like we. They have an organ, we call it a heart, but their hemolymph, their blood, is not red like ours. It's more yellow or green. So if you ever squash an insect, you'll just go, ugh, what is that? That's their hemolymph, that's their blood. It's not red. Unless you squash something like a fly or something like that. And sometimes that's the pigments in their eye that is red. Or you squash a mosquito and it's your blood comes out of it. So, but with these mites, when they feed, they puncture through the exoskeleton. So it's like having a straw. They suck out the liquid, the hemolymph, which is keeping that bee alive. And that blood circulates and bathes all their internal organs inside their bodies. So that's how it works. So they won't even have a chance to pupate. Now, if they do pupate, the bee will be very weakened, and most of the time it won't survive very long as adults anyway. But once that bee emerges from that cell, they'll have several adult mites now spreading and spreading inside. So it's called a vor destructor, and it's an aptly named for this. So this insect that actually they're not native. This mite, they're not native to North America. So and neither is the honeybee. So they are external parasites, is what they are. So you already talked about they suck what we call the hemolymph, the blood, out. Both adults, developing brood, and they have a tendency to go after the drones, the males. I don't know why that is, but they do. So you can see worldwide in red, the areas in blue. Australia, as the most current information we have now, there are no voromites there, but they suspect if someone moves them into there, they have to be physically moved. So how do they move about so much is movement of queens, any components of a hive, so they get moved about. And you can look, it's way up in Canada, the Arctic, everywhere. In Antarctica, but I don't know anybody's keeping bees down there. But certain places in Africa, maybe because it's maybe just too droughty, too hot, too dry. But they're pretty what we call a cosmopolitan, spread out worldwide. So North America, there's no place there are no mites like these. So here's a good symptom right here. And we can refer this, this is a deformed wing symptom. And when another person brought me some bees in, when we were looking at those, had a quart jar full of dead bees, so I spread them all out. And the first thing I look for right away, instead of looking right for the mite, I look for deformed wing syndrome. And that tells me you've had voromite in there. So the wing does not fully develop, and so these bees would be referred to as crawlers because they cannot fly, and they're just useless to the colony. So a little about the biology. The mite, they're very tiny. Again, they're a type of arachnid. They have 8 legs, and I'm going to tell you, they are tiny, and they're really hard to see on a bee. But once inside the hive, and again, they have a preference for the brood cells that have drones in them, the males, and the female mite will seek out an uncapped cell, and then that's where she'll feed on and reproduce. So gradually, if the bees aren't killed, that when they emerge as an adult, they're going to be extremely weakened stage and they won't survive. So how can we detect? And this is scouting, or we call it monitoring. We want to look at that comb and all the cells and make sure that the right color is there. The capped cells have a dome shape to them. They're not concave, fallen in. There's no little holes or slits in those cells in the capping material either. You can, if you suspect, there's a couple of methods you can do here. Sticky board, a simple thing to do, and you can buy these, and they'll go underneath the bottom, and there'll be a little fine mesh screen, and the mice can fall down through that mesh and adhere to a sticky board. And it's good to have a hand lens to detect those. There's another method called a powdery sugar shake method. And you would collect, say, in a quart jar or something, mason jar, live bees, and say a tablespoon of powdered sugar, and you're going to coat the bees. You're not going to shake it hard. It's not like a blender. You're not making a smoothie or anything. So you want to just tumble it a little. You don't want to hurt the bees, and let them rest for a while. Tumble it again. A lot of times that will dislodge some of the mites, and then you could actually pour that out sometimes like on a cheesecloth, and then the bees will just, they're going like, what happened? And you can return it back to the colony. And if you shake that cheesecloth, the mites are too big to fall through it. Powdered sugar will fall through it, and you'll see the brown specks. Could be a little messy, but it's a way to actually see if you have something like that. What you want to be careful of anytime you use a pesticide, there are some really good instructions on that label. And I'll tell you right now, most people don't realize that a pesticide label is a law, federal law, that, no one goes around and starts arresting people, but a friend of mine does work for the regulatory division of the Tennessee Department of Ag, and he can write up some pretty severe citations. Sometimes you can go to court. But I don't know anybody that's arresting beekeepers these days. But you want to read that label to protect yourself, too. Because some of these products can be very irritating, maybe cause some lung issues, very irritating to your eyes to the point maybe blindness could occur. They're very caustic products. So a pesticide label is actually a law, and it's supposed to be followed. And so read, particularly if there's any what we call personal protective equipment, clothing. Most of the times using any type products, formic acid, any of these things, you want to protect your eyes. And sometimes you might just need a real simple, just little mask over your face. Something very simple. It may say avoid getting contact with your skin on these products. So assuming you know how to do this, see, when my wife buys something and it has a big instruction manual with it, she gives it to me to read. She says, you like doing that? I said, who said I like doing this? Well, you like to read. So she thinks this the science is coming on me. You like to read all this detailed stuff. I said, yeah, about living things, not necessarily how to put this complicated exercise back together. So I'll just sit down and read all these instructions, make sure it's assembled right, so it's used properly. I'm not using it, but so labels are important and directions. So there'll be some warning. There may be a signal word on that pesticide, on that miticide too. If it says caution, that's a signal word, which would cause the least harm to you. It can cause harm to the bees, but these signal word, if it says caution, it might say wear eye protection, wear a simple little respirator mask. Maybe gloves are required. Do this outside. If there's a warning like danger, that's a little more severe. Now this one, tracheal mites, even with a hand lens, I'm going to tell you, this is a tiny little mite, very tiny little mite. And it was first detected, look at that, in 84. So it's been around for a while too. And again, this mite is not native to North America either. So how did it get here? It was brought over here either with bee supplies or live bees. So the human factor, as human beings, sometimes we become vectors. We move insect and disease organisms around this planet. And so the way my thoughts are, there are no more borders anymore. It's just one big world. And because I do a lot of diagnostic work with plant material, diseases, insects, on various things, and we see things appearing in North America every year. And I get new pest alerts from the USDA. They say, well, this finally got here. We knew it would be here, and finally it has arrived. And it's generally because of the movement of plant material. These organisms aren't going to travel across the oceans, which used to be our big buffer zones. So we were protected by the oceans, but now we're not anymore because now we travel. In cargo, ships, planes, everything gets moved. So this was one that did get moved into the United States, and it spread pretty quick. Now, the picture on the bottom right over there, it's hard to tell what that is, but that's actually the trachea, or a breathing tube, that has been removed from the honeybee. This is a somewhat difficult process to do. I'll show you pictures. The mite is extremely tiny, very, very tiny. And of all places they like to live is into the trachea, so the bee can't literally breathe. So how do insects breathe? Well, they don't breathe through the opening in their mouth or nose or anything. They don't do that. Their respiratory system is quite different from ours too. Insects have openings on their sides called spiracles, little tiny openings. And it's involuntary breathing, just we don't think about breathing. So insects don't. And air, oxygen molecules just come in to their body. And then they're just moved about throughout their body. So they don't breathe in through a nasal passage or anything like that. But they still have to breathe and take in oxygen. So what happens, their trachea, which are similar to ours, get clogged up with mites of all things. And the mites will feed too. I mean, they're in there not just because it's a great place to be. No, they're going to be feed too. So they do some damage there. So we'll look at, and I don't detect these very often. I have to look at these through a microscope. A hand lens is just not going to do the trick here. And also, you could refer to these bees as crawlers. They can't fly, so we call them crawlers too. So they're more of a burden on the colony. So these are incredibly small, about the diameter of a human hair. So you can see how tiny they are. And so they feed and breed inside the trachea of the bee. And they're not laying thousands of eggs. They lay sufficient enough eggs that enough damage is done to the bee trachea that the bee will die. It's 8 to 12 days, 1 egg per day. That's sufficient. That's the looking down with a bee with a head has been removed. So basically we kind of have to dissect the bee. And these are dead bees. So we just pull the head off gently. And then I have to, with some tweezers under a microscope, gently kind of pull out the trachea. And the trachea tubes are incredibly tiny. And if the bee is, I tell you, don't leave these bees like in your car over the weekend if you're going to bring them to me and they just get hot and bake and dry up, because there's no way you can determine if a tracheal mice are there. But that K-wing is a definite clue. So here's a really close-up shot. On the left, the bottom arrow, you see they call it scarring of that. That's the trachea. And then there are actually little mites in there too. The scarring from feeding. The trachea on the right is pretty clear. It doesn't have tracheal mites in it. But all it has to do is fill up one side of the trachea. They will slowly multiply. So you can see the shape of the bee. The wings are out. And so that's an extremely tiny mite, very, very tiny. So on your own, that would be difficult to diagnose. But K-wing, that's simple to see. So sometimes diagnosing some of these mite problems with bees is not so difficult as with some of the plant material I have to work with. It's extremely difficult. So there are treatments too. Some are very similar to vormite treatments too. Now this one you can get what we call oil patties. And you can actually make these too. And I'm not sure if it's anything in the book about making these.
I'm not sure if this is the
Yeah. And it generally lasts about a month. And what it was used, you can use some of these like botanical type products on it, organic products. And it's the vapors being released from that are lethal to the mites. And some mice actually even feed sometimes on this. But this is, that's more in the book. The last one we're going to look at is not a mite. And right in the center, it's a little tiny beetle, an aptly named small hive beetle. These problematic beetles come and go. And I don't know if recently any of the beekeepers complained about having small hive beetle.
Everybody has hive beetles. You just try to control it.
Yeah. So it's, I noticed years ago, I did a lot of diagnosis of this in Bells Bend, Sulphur Creek area. For some reason, it was very problematic in that area. Other parts of Davis County, we didn't see a problem with it, but they can be. Now, this is a pretty destructive little beetle because it does some extensive feeding. And so this is an insect that can fly, and they're pretty good flyers. And so it's an insect that goes through a complete change in shape, complete metamorphosis. And there we have the immature larval stage on the right. In the middle, there's two pupa, and then they develop into an adult beetle. Very, very tiny, dark brown to black beetles. And so this one is, this pest has been around for a little while, not as long as the mice have been around. And again, this one is not native to North America, so these are all introduced, you would say, exotic pests. So this one came from South Africa. And this is in the states, southern states, so we have warmer climates. This becomes a major pest. As our climate in Tennessee has warmed up, small hive beetles have become more and more of a pest. They don't do well in cold winters. A symptom here would be, actually, you're going to use your nose. You might get an odor, like decaying oranges, sweet sour scent sometimes. This is because the honey is starting to ferment. And this is the sugars and all that. So you're getting this fermentation going on. And so fermentation, you'll get several odors from that process, chemical process. Honey may actually start running out of the hive itself. And the beetles actually, when the larvae, when they feed, actually they make a slime, produce a slime too. So some of the parts of that comb, bees may not be active in it. It acts as a repellent to the bees. Bees like a pretty clean house. And these small hive beetles mess up that nice house, so they start repelling bees. So a little bit on their biology. Again, they're only about 1/4 of an inch long. They're not big. Dark brown to black, and their bodies are pretty flattened. It's slightly curved. The females actually will leave the hive and they can overwinter. The larvae will pupate in the ground close to the hive. So a lot of the treatment can be done is right into the ground sometimes. So females, again, are strong flyers. They enter the hives, lay eggs, and they don't like the light. So if you open up the top of the hive, and it's a bat infestation, you might see them crawl around and running into cracks and crevices to hide. So they like to avoid light. So the eggs can hatch in less than a week. Now look what they feed on. They'll actually take the food source from the bees, the pollen, honey, bee brood, the bee larvae, and the wax itself. So these little larvae, since they'll go through complete change in shape, only takes them roughly a period of about 2 weeks. They will drop to the bottom of the board and they will crawl out and they bury themselves in the soil to pupate. So it's, the pupation, the life cycle is not completed in the hive itself. It's completed outside the hive in the ground. And so then next spring, what happens, you have an emergence of adult beetles close to the hive. So now we have a reinfestation of that. So again, if you open a hive and it has a bad problem, the picture on the left are little small hive beetles congregating around. When you open that up, they'll generally scatter. They don't like the light. Here you see strong colonies, the best defense against. And these strong colonies, the best defense against any of these pests. Same way when you have a plant. If the plant is under stress, they're more prone to disease insect attack. Interesting thing about voromite, since that is an Asian species of mite, these Asian species of honeybees will actually can clean themselves and rid themselves of these mites. But the European bees are not capable of doing that. So depending on the species of bees you get even, may determine how well they handle a pest issue. Now you can actually get, it's hard to see in the very bottom, there's a little screen and there's some oils in there, something like a mineral oil, vegetable oil, where the little beetle can drop down into that and actually drown in the oil. So that's a even though you considered it oil may be a chemical, but I would consider it a non-chemical type method of managing small hive beetle. And that's very effective. And you can get these. And so when they go to the bottom and even to crawl out, sometimes they get caught in that oil. So that's a very effective means of small hive beetle control. We'll wrap it up here saying there are other pests. It's wax moths, and it's a moth, actually the caterpillar, does feed on the comb too. So it's interesting what these insects, their diet consists of. It's amazing to me. Nosema, American foul brood disease, European foul brood are potential very serious diseases. These are not insects or mites. But it's the ones we talked about today, the ones you're probably going to come in contact with and see. And you can read about these other ones. Now, there are other, what I call just insects that are more annoying to bees than anything. Spiders even, they're predators. Sometimes wasps will come in and may attack some bees, but generally we don't have any type of recommendation for control because it's not necessary for these cases. Again, your beekeeping in Tennessee, it's recently been revised. If you knew all that was in that publication, you'd be a master beekeeper. If you're interested in another really excellent book, a little bit thicker one, I'll just leave this out. in the back on the table sheet. Maybe want to write that down.
Who's the author?
I don't know if I can pronounce their names. It's spelled Sammataro. Now the other one, I challenge someone to pronounce this. Well, it's Avittabile. So they couldn't have a simple name like Cook or Smith. Now I'll have this out. This book goes in a lot of detail.
We have multiple copies of that book in our lending library.
Okay, excellent.
That is a wonderful book.
Okay, well, time to wrap this up. I can't believe it took me an hour to get here from Donaldson. I thought I was living in Los Angeles or something, and it was unbelievable. But a cattle truck turned over on Brawley Parker right in Donaldson, where I live, and I'm lucky. Sometimes say I'm on the what we call the DART, Disaster Animal Response Team for Davis County, and I didn't get called to that situation because even though I have an entomology background, I have the only agent in our county that has to deal with animal crisis, farm animal things. So it's probably a good thing maybe I wasn't answering my phone because I said, oh, it's going to go off. And I said, well, I got to talk to the beekeepers tonight. I can't, someone else has got to round up the cattle. But we've had I get calls like that every now and then. So it's not just the little bees that I have to deal with sometimes. It's the big farm animals too. So thank you for, Gene, for inviting me over here. Your reference books are excellent, I tell you, and take time to learn and build a skill level up, and you'll be very pleased with being a beekeeper. Guaranteed it. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for being here.